Alright, it's time for another update and forecast on the California wildfires. We have a few things that we're going to do throughout this video. As always, I'm going to update you on all the most important information when it comes to the various wildfires in California. We're also going to be taking a look at the fire weather forecast to see what kind of conditions we can expect over the next couple of days, which will give us an idea of what our wildfires will be doing over the next couple of days. But when it comes to the wildfires that we're going to be looking at, I'm going to split it into two categories throughout the course of this video. First, we're going to look at the two largest wildfires still burning in California, the Caldor and the Dixie Fire. But I'm going to say this with a big disclaimer because I don't want to jinx it, but I'm hoping that this is actually the last time that we cover those fires, because based on the satellite imagery, you can see very little smoke still coming off of the Caldor and the Dixie fires. If you look very closely, you can maybe see a little bit, and especially here on the northern side of the Dixie, but overall the last few days we've had very calm fire behavior, and we have some new fires popping up that I want to focus on more in future videos. So going to give a good rundown on the Dixie and Caldor fires right now, but hopefully it's the last update that we have to do. But again, there are some challenges in the fire weather forecast, so I'm certainly going to keep an eye on those fires, and then I'll be sure to bring anything up if those do flare back up again. But you can see what I think is the higher priority as of right now. It's the new lightning fires that we have going on in the southern Sierras here. That includes the Windy Fire, the Paradise Fire, the Colony Fire, and then you can also see all of this activity in the very northwestern parts of California with the McCash, the River Complex, and the Monument Fires. So right there we have about 6 wildfires that are still actively burning, so hopefully going to focus more on those in future videos, but towards the end of this live stream, we are going to break down what has been happening on those fires recently. But first, we are going to go over the two largest wildfires that are still burning in California right now. It is the Dixie and Caldor Fire, which you can see the Dixie is number 2 on the largest wildfires in the history of California. Caldor is number 15. But it'll be interesting to see if the Monument Fire overtakes the Caldor Fire at some point over the next week or two, because Caldor has pretty much stopped growing, and the Monument, as we are seeing in that satellite imagery, there is still some growth happening on that one. So we'll be looking at that throughout the course of this video. But again, big focus for the beginning of this is just going to be hopefully wrapping up the Dixie and Caldor, which you can also see are the number 14 and 16 most destructive wildfires in California. So that is why, even though they're not seeing that much fire behavior right now, we are going to do one last run through to see overall what has happened on these fires. So first one that we're going to go into is the Caldor Fire. Zooming in here, first thing that I notice is it's not covered in that pink color that you see. Actually is covering some of those northwestern California fires. That means there's a red flag warning. That was what was in place over the Caldor Fire when we had it take off to the northeast, when we had that red flag warning with those 35-mile-per-hour wind gusts from the southwest, which, as you remember, pushed those fingers right above Kirkwood, right underneath South Lake Tahoe. That was, I think, one of the scariest wildfire situations of this entire season, but somehow the amazing work done by our wildland firefighters, they were able to keep the fire itself out of Kirkwood, out of South Lake Tahoe, out of Christmas Valley. And as you can see on this map, not very many hot spots remaining. It might actually be easier to see on this map where the hotspot color is a little bit more pronounced. I'll turn off the structures for a second. So you can see there is still some hot spots on the Caldor Fire where you see those little red stars right there. If I turn the structures back on, you can see where we had our major concerns, where the fire pushed up near South Lake Tahoe, where all those orange dots show the thousands of structures in that location. And then also this area where the fire pushed just to the north of Kirkwood right here. And you can see that on the whole Caldor Fire, don't get me wrong, there is still some activity going on, but much, much less activity than we were seeing last week, and especially during that red flag warning. But you do still see some of those heat signatures being picked up. If we look at the live heat signatures, I imagine there's not going to be any showing on this map. So usually, and you'll remember this during the red flag warning, we had large areas of the Caldor Fire that were showing huge heat detections, which usually show up as little black squares. We can scroll over to the northwestern parts of California so you can see what it usually looks like. You usually have heat detections like that, but as you can see on the Caldor Fire right now, not picking up any heat. Again, that doesn't mean that the fire is completely out. For proof of that, we can look at the Caldor Fire incident update, where they do say the fire remained active throughout the day with continued warm and dry conditions. Active fire behavior with isolated torching was observed in the interior islands and pockets of timber. So fire is still certainly going on. There is still some activity, but just much less than we were seeing in the past. And currently, satellite not picking up any heat detections on it right now. Doesn't actually mean there's no heat on the fire, just means there's not nearly as much as we were seeing last week. But when it comes to the Caldor Fire, you can see that is up to 219,000 acres. We really haven't seen that grow very much in the last few days. To see that progression of the fire and to see how much it has been growing recently, we can look at the progression map where you see that blue color is where the fire first started out on the 15th and 16th. That was the day I was covering this live when this happened. It went from about 5,000 acres to 60,000 acres in one day, and we just had a massive amount of growth that went through Grizzly Flats right there. And then the predominant wind direction ever since then has been from the southwest, and especially during that red flag warning that we had towards the end of August and the start of September. I forget the exact days that it happened. You can see it's in that orange color on the progression map though, where it just took off to the northeast right here when we had those strong southwesterly winds, took off towards the north of Kirkwood as well. If you try to match up the orange color there, that does look like it was maybe the 31st to September 3rd that red flag warning took place. Just zooming in there, you can see where the most recent growth is, where you see more of that burgundy color. It matches up where we're seeing some of the recent hotspots on that other map to that finger to the north of Kirkwood, and then to some of those unburnt pockets of fuel in the interior areas north of that finger. So that's where the recent growth has been. But what I always like to look at are these numbers down here. Apologies if you can't see it, because I know it probably looks pretty small on your screen, but this is why I'm feeling so good about the Caldor Fire at this point. So right there, I believe that was the red flag warning. 29th, 30th, 31st. And then maybe even into September 1st as well, we grew 20,000 acres in a day, 13,000 acres in a day, 13,000 acres in a day again. And then if you look at the recent growth in the last 5 days, it's gone from 218,000 acres total to 219,000 acres total. So last 5 days, we've had maybe 500 acres burned here, 0, or I believe that was just because we didn't have any flights on that day. But then yesterday, 73 additional acres burned. So certainly seeing a decelerating trend when it comes to that acreage burn, which is the exact trend that we'd like to see on the Caldor Fire. Now, the other good trend, we're up to 67% containment. To see where that is, you can see where that black line is, which is basically the entire western half of the fire is covered in that black line where we have containment. That doesn't mean that the firefight's completely over in those areas. They're most likely doing some mop up. I do remember them saying on this northern edge they have to clear out a lot of the trees that were damaged by the fire, because when trees get damaged by a fire, they get weakened and then they can easily fall over when you get your next big windstorm. So they're doing that kind of work on the northern edge here. And then they're also working to wrap up the remaining areas that are still uncontained on this fire. But I think the best thing to see, and we could zoom into this to show it even better, is where we have picked up that containment. Remember, the main spots that we were worried about when this fire was really taking off was Kirkwood down here, Christmas Valley, South Lake Tahoe, and especially Myers. because that was where we were seeing the most amount of fire growth. That was where we had another 2 days of red flag warning when those areas were already threatened. And you can see that we've picked up some great containment in all of those key areas where you see that black line to the north of Kirkwood protecting us from those hotspots that we were seeing earlier, and then also full containment around Christmas Valley and South Lake Tahoe as well. So looking pretty good in those locations as of right now. And because of that, when it comes to a lot of our evacuation warnings and orders, we have seen a number of those lifted in the last few days. Remember, there is one point in time when all of South Lake Tahoe was in that mandatory evacuation order. If we zoom in there, you can see that parts of South Lake Tahoe have actually moved into that repopulation category where you see that green color. Some areas have been just lifted to an evacuation warning where you see that yellow color, but we do still have a fairly large amount of area that is still in that mandatory evacuation order. So again, even though the fire is looking much better than it was in the past, the incident report did still say that they are still seeing some activity. We did see some hotspots going on. They even still say 16,000 structures are still currently threatened. So evacuation orders are still in place. I'm by no means saying that the fire is over and wrapped up. Still lots of hard work to do, and as we've seen throughout this season, these fires do have a tendency to flare back up when warm, dry, windy conditions return. But again, lots of good news coming out of the Caldor Fire. So what I'm hoping is this is the last time that we even cover it, but I am going to keep my eye on it just in case we do see something flare back up. And one other thing that I will show is when it comes to the number that I never like reporting, but it is an important part of the overall Caldor Fire story, is there has been over 1,000 structures destroyed, and that was something else that they mentioned on this incident report. They said damage inspection is now complete with 3,356 structures assessed. So to get a better idea of that information, we can look at the damage assessment map, where again, if you're a local and you're worried about your structure, you can actually zoom into this map. I put the link for this, as well as most of the other links that we use throughout this video, in the description of this video. So you can find this link here. And then what you can do is actually zoom in to the structures themselves, all the way down to the street view where you see those red structures. That's where CAL FIRE went in, the damage assessment teams, and they reported it's greater than 50% destroyed, the structure itself. Where you see the black structures, that's where no damage was shown. And then what you can also do is actually click on the red structures, and in many cases it has a photo to go along with that information, which I know many people are most likely very interested to know this kind of information. So again, the link for that is in the description. And as always, thoughts and prayers go out to everybody who not only has been affected by this fire already, but is still being affected by it with the current evacuation orders that we do still have in place. So as always, thoughts and prayers go out to everybody affected. Good news is that we still do have a very large amount of resources on this fire, even though there have been a large number of other fires flaring up throughout the state. They do not want this one to flare back up again, so they still have over 3,000 personnel on this, mopping things up, trying to get rid of all those smoldering areas, trying to clear out some of those dangerous trees that were damaged by the fire. Still lots of hard work to be done on the Caldor Fire, but overall, things are looking much better. And especially when we compare with that red flag warning conditions when it was taking off towards South Lake Tahoe and Kirkwood. Glad to say that, again, I don't want to jinx it, knocking on wood here, but it looks like this fire is almost to the point where it could be wrapped up. Just crossing my fingers that the fire weather conditions continue to work in our favor. And if we actually want to look at the fire weather conditions, overall, we've had a high pressure system building over us for the last couple of days. You can see that's set to peak over us on Tuesday, but then we start to see this little dip in this cold air mass start to push into the Pacific Northwest. So we actually will start to see some cooling conditions Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Now, the big story that I think we'll have to continue to follow over the next week is some of the models are showing that there might be our first big offshore wind event of the season as we get later in the weekend towards the start of next week. But again, that's so far off in the forecast, I'm actually not even going to dive into it yet. Guaranteed models will change somewhat by the time that actually happens, but that is something we're going to have to keep our eye on, because it's usually those offshore wind events that lead to some high fire danger. So certainly going to keep my eye on that in the weather forecast, but also going to keep my eye on the Caldor Fire to make sure that it doesn't flare back up again. And what I'm hoping is this is the last time that we cover it, but if it does flare up again, I'll make sure to include it in another video. Now, the other fire where we're in a very similar situation as the Caldor Fire is the Dixie Fire. Again, up there with the largest wildfires in the history of California, number 14 on the most destructive wildfires in the history of California. I think the big question mark that we've been thinking about for the last week or two is if the Dixie Fire would overtake the August complex as the largest wildfire in California history. It looks like, again, just doing some quick math here, maybe about 72,000 acres for it to overtake the August complex. But as of right now, and again, I keep going back and forth on if I think it's going to overtake, number one. As of right now, I don't think it's going to, because they've made a lot of great progress over the last few days, and it does look like we'll have some not exactly critical conditions over the next few days. So I'm hoping they'll be able to continue some of that progress. Not expecting any red flag warnings or excessive heat warnings to pop up over the next couple of days. So hopefully they're able to continue that progress that they have made. So that also shows it that Dixie Fire not covered in that pink color right there, which represents a red flag warning. Again, it does look like we have to worry about that for some of the other fires that we'll be following later in this video. But overall, Dixie Fire has had some good moisture over it recently, much less critical conditions, less windy than when we were in that red flag warning. So because of that, the fire behavior has significantly calmed down, and we've also been able to make some great progress on it. You can remember at times on the satellite imagery where we were looking at the Dixie Fire and there were 6 separate pyrocumulus clouds coming off of it, just huge smoke plumes, just generating a very large amount of smoke. Did still have some smoke coming off of it throughout the day today, but much, much less than we're used to seeing on the Dixie Fire. So looks like the good progress that we've made the last couple of days continued throughout the day today. Again, you do still see where some of those hot spots remain. You can imagine right there, you do have some of these unburnt pockets of fuel. So that's where there is still some fuel for the fire to flare up and, just like on the Caldor Fire, lead to some occasional torching, which is maybe responsible for some of that smoke that we were seeing throughout the day today. But just looking at this map compared to what it has looked like in the past, I think we've been covering the Dixie Fire for about 2 months now, and this is, I would say, the best that the Dixie Fire has looked in 2 months. So just looking at it, there's a couple of things that worked in our favor. One, on this eastern edge, it pushed into the Sugar Fire, or the Beckworth complex there. So almost fits together like a puzzle piece, where pushed into that fire. A lot of the fuels were already cleared out of there from the Beckworth complex earlier this season. Basically stopped it in its tracks. And then on this northern edge, we've had some more favorable conditions. It was actually that thunderstorm threat that came through. Remember, we actually had a red flag warning for those thunderstorms. That was actually the day that both the Caldor Fire and the Dixie Fire really started to turn around. It was a big question mark because we knew there was going to be some lightning, we knew there was going to be some gusty winds, but we also knew there was going to be an increase in moisture and the potential for some rainfall. So it was a big question mark about what was going to happen. Now, what ended up happening was we basically got all of that. We did get some lightning, which has started these new fires down here, which we're going to be talking about in just a minute, including the Windy Fire, the Paradise Fire, and the Colony Fire. Those all started with that lightning event, but on the Caldor Fire and the Dixie Fire, It actually ended up just bringing some great moisture. The clouds dropped our temperatures down, and in some cases we even picked up a little bit of rainfall. And ever since then, it seems like we've had very minimal activity on both the Caldor and the Dixie Fire. So just looking at the live hotspots, you can see not picking up any live hotspots. Again, that doesn't mean that the fire is completely out. We do still have those smoldering areas and where there is still some activity going on, but not enough for the satellite to pick up any of those hotspots right now, which is, again, you could take it with a grain of salt because we've seen the errors in these satellites as we've been following this wildfire season, but certainly great to not see any of those hotspots currently on the Dixie Fire. So when it comes to the Dixie Fire, you can see 960,000 acres, but we haven't seen that go up very much recently. If we want to see where the recent growth has been, again, it was the two spots I was already talking about, that eastern edge that bumped into the Beckworth complex, and that northern edge. We did have that one day where it took off to the north right there, started threatening Old Station, and we still had one more red flag day when that first took off. So what I was worried about was with the next red flag day and with those thunderstorms coming through that we were going to see some 50-mile-per-hour winds that were just going to continue to push this farther to the north and just lead to a whole new situation up here. But thunderstorms ended up bringing in some great moisture, and we've seen very little growth ever since then. Again, you probably won't be able to see these numbers, or maybe you can if you have some really good eyes. The red flag warning, and when we were seeing the most growth on that eastern edge and that northern edge, was right on that 9th and 10th right there, where we had burned 23,000 acres and then 12,000 acres. But then if you look at the last 2 days, the 11th and the 12th, on the 11th we burned less than 1,000 acres, and then yesterday only 316. So huge improvement there, especially when you compare it with some of the days that we have seen on the Dixie Fire. We had that one day where it grew 15 miles in one day. We've had a couple of days throughout its lifetime where it grew over 30,000 acres. So to grow 316 acres in one day yesterday was, I would say, quite possibly the best wildfire news that we've heard all season, because Dixie Fire has been especially stubborn for the last 2 months. Seems like every time it starts to die down, it flares back up again. But this right now is the weakest that we have seen the Dixie Fire look. So I'm hoping and knocking on wood that this time it holds, and this hopefully will be the last time that we even cover the Dixie Fire. The other number that is trending in our direction is 75% containment. If we want to see where a lot of that containment has taken place, pretty much everywhere except the very northern section here, and then a couple of scattered spots on that eastern section over here. But we haven't seen very many hotspots on that eastern section in a number of days, and it does look like things are calming down on the northern section here. So hopefully they'll be able to further increase that containment as we move forward. But just a pretty amazing map to see the work that has been done by our wildland firefighters. I forget the exact number. I heard somebody say it in one of the updates for the Dixie Fire, but I believe they said if you stretched out the fire perimeter, it'd be over 50 miles long. And I think I heard that a week or two ago, so it's probably even longer at this point. But just to think about the fact that 75% of that is now contained shows all the amazing work that has been done by our wildland firefighters. Now, with all that being said, there are still some evacuation warnings and orders going on. Again, the satellite data we're looking at, that isn't perfect. It doesn't show any heat coming off there right now, but we do know there is still some heat on the Dixie Fire. We do still have some active areas. So because of that, we do still have some spots on the fire where we have those mandatory evacuation orders, especially on the northern edge of the fire, which actually makes sense because out of the whole Dixie Fire, that is the spot that has remained the most active over the last couple of days. So not a big surprise that we do still have some of those evacuation orders up there. Still have some warnings on that eastern edge where we still haven't picked up full containment there yet, but everything seems to be trending in the right direction when it comes to evacuation warnings being lifted. Hopefully in days to come that will be lifted as well, but for that we'll just have to wait and see. And again, you can access this map in the description of this video, as well as basically all the other links that I've shown throughout this video. Now, one other number that we haven't seen come up recently because there hasn't been any new structures destroyed recently, at least as far as I know, but that number is at 1,329 structures destroyed. And again, there is a report of one fatality on the Dixie Fire. I don't actually know the details of that. I remember seeing in my comments that somebody sent me a YouTube video that was explaining what happened there. So I'll try to watch that and include that in tomorrow's update if I figure out what exactly happened there. But again, when it comes to the structures destroyed, if you're a local and you want to know how your structure may have fared throughout the Dixie Fire, again, this link is in the description as well. You can actually zoom into the structures themselves where you see those black structures. That's where there's no damage. The red structures is where the damage assessment team went in and reported greater than 50% destroyed. And then you can also click on and actually see photos of the structures themselves. So again, this map always reminds me that thoughts and prayers go out to everybody who has been affected, not only on the Dixie Fire, but on all the wildfires that we've seen this season. It has certainly been a bad wildfire season. I thought that after 2020, that just by the law of averages, you'd think that a season that extreme last year, maybe we would have a good season this year, but because of that ongoing drought, with the record dry fuels that we have across the state, a lot of the hot, dry, windy weather that we've had, it's been a fairly bad wildfire season so far. And unfortunately, we're really just getting to where we start to see those big offshore wind events. Again, that's, I think, the big story in the weather forecast moving forward, is the fact that there is the possibility of our first offshore wind event towards the start of this next week. But again, I'm not even going to really dive into that at this point because weather models will constantly change until we get closer to that actual date. But just wanted to throw that out as a warning that may be something that we have to look at as we move forward, because again, it's those offshore days that can lead to some of our highest fire danger. So we'll have to continue to follow the models to see what happens there. But overall, in the fire weather forecast, we have had this ridge building in over the last couple of days, so that's set to peak tomorrow afternoon. We'll have some warm temperatures and some dry air, so we'll most likely see some activity on our wildfires, but not seeing those extreme winds that we were seeing in the past on some of those huge red flag days, although we do see some areas in very northern California where there is that red flag warning. So we'll take a closer look at the fire weather conditions for that. But as we get into Thursday, we're actually going to start to see a cold air mass move into the Pacific Northwest. That'll drop our temperatures down somewhat and hopefully drop our fire behavior down even more as well. So overall, when it comes to the Dixie Fire, it's been quite a battle going forward. And again, I'm going to knock on wood when I say this, but what I'm hoping is that this battle is finally nearing its end. Again, I'm hesitant to say that because every time that I've thought that in the past on the Dixie Fire, it flared back up again. But this is definitely the best that the Dixie Fire has looked in, I think, the 2 months since I've been covering it. So hopefully this progress that we've made continues. Hopefully this will be my last update on the Dixie Fire, but I'll keep an eye on it and I'll be sure to include any information if it does flare back up again. So with that being said, I'm going to take a quick sip of water. I'll open up the live chat to see if we've had any questions throughout the course of this video. Again, apologies if anybody's been posting any questions in here. I just wanted to get out the information on the Caldor and Dixie Fire first. And now we're going to transition into a more interactive approach for the rest of this video, because we're going to be trying to figure out the most recent information when it comes to the more active wildfires going on in California, including the Windy Fire, the Paradise Fire, the Colony Fire, the McCash Fire, the Monument Fire, and the River Complex. And now I'll have the live chat open, and I'll try to... Oh, I see somebody actually... So I was about to say I'll try to keep a better eye on the live chat as we move forward. But I do see that somebody did comment about what that one fatality was. So assistant fire engine operator and a 30-year veteran of the U.S. Forest Service died from an illness, NBC Bay Area reported. So that answers the one question that we were wondering earlier in this video. And again, thoughts and prayers go out to the family of Marcus Pacheco. So sorry to hear about your loss. So going to take a quick sip of water, and then we'll dive into the more interactive approach where we look at some of the more active wildfires going on in California, including some of those new lightning fires that have popped up based on that started from those thunderstorms that came through last week. Alrighty, so we're going to start off by going over those new lightning fires that we have, the Windy Fire, the Colony Fire, and the Paradise Fire. You can see out of California, we really had two active areas. So, see, somebody just asked a question. Are you going to look at the potential offshore wind event around the 20th? So I did mention this earlier that is a potential in the forecast moving forward, but I usually have the rule of thumb that I don't trust a weather forecast more than 3 days out. I made that mistake with some of the snowstorms this last winter where you report on a snowstorm 4 days in advance, and then every single day it just keeps changing and changing. So I definitely am keeping my eye on that first offshore wind event that we might have, but I'm waiting to really dive into it until the models get a little bit more confident on what's actually going to happen. But first, I do just want to dive into these lightning fires that we have down here. Again, that's the Windy Fire, the Paradise Fire, and the Colony Fire. And we were actually seeing a lot of activity on the alert wildfire cams when we were looking at them yesterday. So I think that's actually probably the best place to start, is to see if we can actually see what these fires looked like throughout the day today. I'll try to remember exactly what cameras we were looking at. Actually, don't need to remember because we do have video. This was the camera that looked the most extreme yesterday, Tobias Peak 1. So let's check that out and see what the Windy Fire looked like throughout the day today. Again, this was the camera we were looking at yesterday that had the most activity. Right there, it looks like we started the day off with a lot of smoke. You can imagine during the nighttime hours, the winds calm down, so a lot of that smoke is able to drop down to the surface. And it looks like we can barely even see anything on the cameras throughout the day today because there was just so much smoke in that area. So not a whole lot of information there. This looks fairly active right here. Buck Rock 2. So let's take a look at this right here to try to figure out where this is pointed. So yeah, this is looking down at those lightning fires. I would imagine that this one is the Windy Fire because this looks fairly active throughout the day today, and it did look like that was the most active wildfire that we did have throughout the day today. So certainly, I would say that's just a better view of what we're looking at on the satellite imagery where we could see all that smoke coming off. If we want to actually dive in here to get a better idea of where these fires are and what cities that they might be around, we can turn on the incidents so that we can see what fires we're looking at. Right there is the Windy Fire. It says that it's 1,297 acres and 0% contained. And just looking at that, again, this map I would say is sometimes more helpful when it comes to looking at wildfires, because we can also turn on the structures to see how many structures may be threatened in that area. Just looking in here, so it's where you see those orange dots. It looks like we have 3 major clusters of structures all around the Windy Fire, but if we go to measure it, it almost looks like they're all perfectly the same distance apart. Looks like it's about 5 miles in all 3 directions between where we see the Windy Fire and where we see a lot of those structures. So we're certainly going to keep an eye on those spots. I imagine that they have some evacuation warnings and orders in place, and that will definitely be something that we continue to follow as we move forward. The other 2 fires in this area are the Paradise Fire and the Colony Fire. You can see these look a bit closer to some of these structures. If we look at the distance here to the Paradise Fire, that one is about 3 miles. And again, take these maps with a grain of salt. We've seen time and time again how off a lot of this hotspot data can be. So could be 2.5 miles right there, could be 5 miles. But it's just giving us a general idea of the area. So we do have Paradise and Colony right there. And I do want to see something that we should be able to find on Twitter. So we already looked at the video of the Windy Fire. But so right there, that one shows 974 acres, but that was 7 hours ago. We saw the more recent one where it has gone over 1,000. I do want to look at the Paradise Fire. If we're seeing a lot of those, so they're also calling the combination of the Paradise Fire and the Colony Fire the KNP complex. So I'm not the best at looking at the live chat. Somebody might have asked that question, what's the difference? But the KNP complex is the Colony, Paradise, and Cabin Fire. And here is a pretty good aerial view of what those looked like throughout the day today. So kind of matches that first camera that we were looking at, where we couldn't really see anything because there was so much smoke in the area. And you can see that those fires did remain active throughout the day today with a fair amount of smoke. And I see that somebody actually just posted a link to my video. So thank you, Daniel Firecopter, for the shout out on Twitter. Right, that was also my post from yesterday. So this is what it looked like yesterday. And what I'm trying to do right now is figure out what camera that was. Again, in the future, I'm going to leave the camera on the bottom of the screen there so that we can figure out what exactly we're looking at. That's a pretty cool shot right there. So Paradise Fire on the left, Colony Fire on the right from Morro Rock and Sequoia National Park. You can see that the smoke plumes are almost just combining right there. Right there. This is the Windy Fire. What we are looking for is that right there. That's what I've been looking for the last couple minutes. So Blue Mountain Kern 2. That was the one that we were looking at yesterday to find the Paradise Fire and the Colony Fire. So Blue Mountain Kern 2 right there. So we'll look at what this looked like throughout the day today. I imagine we're going to be seeing a fair bit of smoke just based on some of those other camera shots that we were looking at. So yesterday we saw a big smoke plume popping up right here, which I believe was the Paradise Fire, and then we also had a large smoke plume over here, which was the Colony Fire. But most of these cameras do spin, so we may not be looking at the exact same spot as yesterday. Certainly looks like there's a fair bit of smoke, and right there we are seeing some kind of glow going on right there. So I'm curious to know if that's the fire or possibly just a city off in the distance. I think right there, that's most likely a better shot of what we're interested in. Again, not totally sure if this is the Windy, the Colony, or the Paradise. It's a bit hard to tell just because there's not many landmarks that we can use to identify it. But even as we get into the overnight hours, does look like these fires are remaining active. So this is kind of drives the point home why we are going to continue to follow these as they move forward. If we want to get an idea of exactly what the numbers are on these fires, because we've seen some varied reports in the different places that we've been looking. So I want to just go to InstaWeb to get the exact numbers. That's usually the best place to get your fire information from. So we're going to zoom out here for a second. Easier to find the fires that way. So right there, K&P complex, you can see they're reporting that is 1,000 acres. Interested to see how many personnel they have on this, because again, we still do have a very large amount of personnel on the Caldor Fire, the Dixie Fire, all of the other fires going on. So interested to see, yeah, only 130 personnel on this right now. And it is a lot of steep terrain here, a lot of critical fuels. Does look like good ventilation will favor fire growth. Westerly afternoon and evening winds with gusts up to 40 miles per hour will continue to surface over the wind-prone mountain and desert areas through the middle of this week. So we've had some challenging conditions over there recently. Looks like those challenging conditions are going to be continuing on the K&P complex, which I believe would make this one the windy, or Walker's Fire right there. There's the windy fire right there. So that one, again, I couldn't find it because for whatever reason they don't have the fire perimeter, even though they are reporting that the windy fire is up to 1,297 acres. Interested to see the personnel on this one, 279. So what I imagine is, as the Caldor Fire and the Dixie Fire calm down over the next couple of days, they're going to be able to redeploy some of those resources to some of these more active fires that we're seeing with the Windy, Paradise, and Colony Fire, or the K&P complex, because just based on the satellite imagery, you can see that those have been more active than the Caldor and the Dixie recently. But again, I imagine those are still the top priority, because how difficult the fight has been so far, the last thing they want is those to flare back up again. So they are putting in a lot of work right now to get that mop up, clear out a lot of those dangerous trees. And I imagine we will start to see some of those personnel increase on these lightning fires. And again, those started with that lightning event that came through when those thunderstorms came through with that red flag warning. Just kind of smoldered for a couple of days there, and then yesterday we really started to see things pick up. And just based on some of the camera shots that we've looked at over the last maybe 10-20 minutes, it does look like we had another active day on those lightning fires. So certainly going to continue to follow the Windy Fire, the Paradise Fire, Colony Fire, K&P complex. And I didn't say it yet, but I do know that there are some evacuation warnings and orders in place when it comes to those fires. So always make sure to stay updated with local resources when it comes to that kind of information. First two places I always go for that kind of information are Cal Fire and instaweb.com. And I put the links for that in the description of this video as well. But now I do want to transition up to where we also have a rather large amount of activity going on in California. You can see it was the northwestern part of California. And I think this map perfectly shows why that was the most active part of California throughout the day today. If we zoom out and zoom up to northwestern California, we'll get there eventually, you can see that this is an area of the state that was actually under a red flag warning, not only today, but I believe yesterday as well. That's why we have seen a lot of activity in this part of California. You can see it's in effect from September 13th, 1:37 p.m. That's the most exact start time of a red flag warning I've ever seen, through September 14th, 9 a.m. And then if we want to see why, it looks like poor overnight recovery. That means that it's going to remain dry overnight, which means fire activity is going to be able to continue overnight, which we didn't read that for the other fires that we were talking about, but I imagine that's also the case for the K&P complex and the Windy Fire. And a lot of those higher elevations, you have very poor relative humidity recoveries, and when we looked at that camera over the last hour, even though it's 9:30 right now, we were still seeing a lot of activity going on. So I imagine it's because it's still extremely dry out, and that's what's allowing the fire to continue. Now, you can also see in strong gusty wind with low RH for a fire weather zone through this evening. So some challenging conditions throughout the day today in this area, which kind of makes sense why we had all that fire activity that we did have up on the northwestern parts of California. And again, when it comes to these fires, the very top one, which is entirely covered in that red flag warning, is the McCash Fire. Looks like that's up to 76,000 acres burned and 11% containment. You can also see that the river complex was under that red flag warning as well today. That's not what I wanted to click on, right? Hay Press incident. I believe Hay Press incident and Summer incident combined, you can call the river complex. We'll actually look at InsuWeb for that information, just because InsuWeb usually has the more updated information. I want to make sure I'm presenting the right numbers here. McCash Fire, 76,000 acres, 11% containment. I'm interested to see where we've been able to pick up that containment, so we could look at the maps. Zoom in right here, although that looks like it was last updated 2 days ago, but I don't believe we've actually picked up any new containment in the last 2 days with how much activity we've been having on this one. But it does look like the western edge of the McCash Fire is where we have been able to pick up at least a little bit of containment there. So now I want to check out the numbers for the river complex. That one is 185,000 acres and 40% containment. And then the other one that we're seeing a lot of activity on right now is the Monument Fire, 212,000 acres, 43% containment. And Monument Fire, I think, is the one that I want to zoom into on this map because, again, we've been following the Monument Fire for, I believe, over a month now because of where we are seeing those hotspots in relation to where we have a large amount of structures. So we have Hayfork down here. You can see where those red stars show up. That's where there has been some more active parts of the fire. What I will say about this area as we go forward here is the good news for Hayfork right now is we have a lot of area that has already burned from the Monument Fire right here. So in order for those hotspots to threaten Hayfork again, you can see how close it did come in the past. That's why this has been one of the fires that we've continually covered over the last month or two. You can imagine a lot of these fuels are now removed. You do have some of those unburnt islands and pockets of fuels, but a lot of that fuel for the wildfire is now burnt out. So you almost have a protective barrier between where you have a lot of those hotspots and where we have thousands of structures right there. Now, with that being said, we do still see some hotspots on this area of the fire up near Burnt Ranch, and I want to make sure I have both of those cities right. So it's Burnt Ranch, Hawkins Bar, and Hoboken. Right there, I believe that's where you see a lot of those orange dots. That's where we have had continual hotspots in those areas over the last couple of days. Interested to see if there's any current hotspots. So it looks like the current hotspots match up with those same red stars that were showing up on the fire perimeter. Again, you can take these with a grain of salt. We've seen in the past how off this hotspot data can be, but we are picking it up in the same areas that we've seen that activity recently. Again, it's that northwestern section of the fire near Burnt Ranch, that northern area of the fire right there, and then that area that had previously threatened Hayfork and is now starting to move off more towards the west. So when it comes to the Monument Fire, I'd say that's definitely one that we have to continue to follow just based on the proximity of where that fire is with some of our structures. And similar story for the river complex and the McCash Fire. There are a number of structures. You can see those orange dots there. I'll flash them on and off so you can see them better. There is a rather large amount of structures around really a lot of the fires that we're talking about in California. So going to have to continue to follow those. Interested to see the live hotspots. That actually looks a little bit better than it was at this time last night, but certainly still a fair bit of activity on the McCash Fire throughout the day today. Actually looks like the river complex has been the most active wildfire throughout the day today, and most of that activity being on the southwestern edge of the river complex. So again, with all those fires, we're just going to have to continue to follow them. I'd say the big ones that we're going to continue to follow as we move forward: the Windy Fire, Colony Fire, Paradise Fire, Monument Fire, River Complex, and McCash Fire. That looks to be the more active ones that we have right now. We spent a fair bit of time covering the Dixie and Caldor throughout this video, but as you can see on the satellite imagery, barely any smoke coming off of those anymore. So what I'm hoping is that this video is the last time that we cover the Dixie and Caldor fires. But again, I'm certainly going to keep an eye on them, because it seems like every time our fires calm down, they figure out a way to flare back up again. But overall, Caldor and Dixie are looking the best they've looked since they started, so I'm hoping this is my last update on those. Certainly not my last update on the lightning complex, or the lightning fires down in the southern Sierras, and those fires that are ongoing in the northwestern parts of the state, where we're likely to continue to see some activity, as the McCash and River Complex are still covered in that red flag warning. Now, I think the biggest question mark as we move forward is what is going to be happening in the weather forecast. Actually, this is something I haven't actually looked at yet, because I almost purposely didn't want to look at it yet, because it's so far off in the forecast that I know things are going to change by the time it actually happens. But National Weather Service has started talking about a possible offshore wind event coming towards the end of the week. And actually, I posted about it on Twitter not too long ago. I posted the exact quote that the National Weather Service said. Tuesday will be hottest day, cooling midweek into the weekend. First possible non-monsoon rain Saturday. That would be awesome if that happened, if we just got a big rain event that put out some of our fires. So that's actually something I didn't mention in this video, because again, I don't want to get too excited and then have it not happen. And usually the models over predict rainfall for the first good rain of a season. So I'm purposely not getting too excited about that yet, because I'm a little skeptical to think that we'll actually get some good rain. But then that's the big one right there. First possible significant offshore wind event Sunday night into Monday. And again, if you don't know, offshore wind event, not just good for surfing, it is very bad for fire danger. That's what a lot of our worst wildfire events have been, from those offshore wind events. So I haven't actually looked at this yet. And again, this is way off in the forecast, so guaranteed this will change by the time it actually happens. But just out of curiosity, let's see. Oh yeah, so Sunday night into Monday morning, just like National Weather Service was saying, you can see those offshore winds coming through here. Looks like we're getting some gusts up in Northern California, up to 40 miles per hour. Again, the reason offshore winds are worse than onshore winds, you imagine when you have onshore winds, it's taking that cool ocean air and pushing it over California. That brings some moisture and humidity to your fires. When it's coming from inland, it's usually very dry air. And then what happens in the worst cases is when it goes down the slope of mountains, it can heat up even more, dry out even more, and then that's where we get some very bad fire danger. So Sunday night into Monday, I think that's one of the big things that we'll be following as we move forward. As we get into Thursday, Friday, Saturday, that's when I'll really start diving into that one. So you can subscribe to stay tuned on that one, and you can also subscribe to stay tuned on the new lightning fires and the various wildfires going on in the northwestern parts of California. Now, as always, thoughts and prayers go out to everybody who has been affected by the wildfires throughout the season. Huge thank you to all the wildland firefighters out there. Just amazing work done throughout the season, and again, especially on that Caldor fire. I cannot believe what they were able to do in Kirkwood and South Lake Tahoe. So Hopefully that's the last time that I cover the Caldor Fire, but amazing work done there, so huge thank you to them. Also thank you to everyone who has sent super chats in the past or sent great comments or questions in the live chat, and then also my patrons as well who help to improve the quality of these videos by allowing me to get things like nice new microphones like I'm using in this video right now. So I hope this video was helpful. If you want to stay tuned with all the wildfires that we've talked about throughout the course of this video and that first possible offshore wind event, you can subscribe to this channel where I'll continue to cover all the major wildfire events throughout the rest of this season. So hope this video was helpful, and thanks for watching.